Hi, I'm Jen from This Old House, and today I'm showing how to build a side table with a concrete top. I love the modern industrial look of furniture that mixes wood with concrete. But as someone who hasn't worked a lot with concrete in the past, I'll admit that I was a little nervous to give it a try. Luckily, it turned out to be much less expensive and easier than I thought. To get started, I first chose a form for the concrete tabletop, so I could then size the base below. I picked up a round drip tray for a water heater that had the 22-inch diameter I was looking for. You could also try something like the liner for a plant tray, but I did find that these were a little too flimsy and that a lot of times they had a more tapered edge than I was after. Next, I designed a base made from sturdy 2x3 cedar boards that angled wider towards the floor so that the table wouldn't tip, and then added notches so that the legs could interlock. With a plan in place, I prepped the pan for the concrete by covering the drip hole with tape. You'll see I tested out Flex Seal tape on the outside and duct tape on the inside, and both worked just fine. Next, I marked the shape on a piece of wire mesh and cut about 2 inches inside the line to create a round layer of reinforcement. To set up my station so that I have access to the underside of the mold to vibrate out the bubbles, I placed a piece of plywood on 2 sawhorses, adding shims under the plywood to ensure everything sat perfectly level. It was finally time to mix the concrete. I used a countertop mix which is supposed to create a bit smoother and stronger surface. The first batch I mixed was a bit too runny, but the look you're after is a peanut butter-like consistency. Once everything was mixed, I sprayed the pan with releasing spray and poured in the concrete. I used some scrap blocks to press and hold the wire mesh to about half the depth of the pour, and then used a plastic taping knife to smooth the surface. Lastly, with a vibrating sander, I agitated the sides and bottom of the mold to move any air bubbles to the surface. Because the first pour I made was a little too watery, I didn't see very many bubbles. But a thicker mix is more prone to trapping bubbles, so make sure to spend some time on this step. I then covered the mold with plastic so it could cure for about 24 hours. As I waited for the concrete to cure, I moved on to building the base. My home center was out of 2x3s, so I started by ripping some from 2x4 boards. Next, I cut them to length at opposing 11-degree angles for the top and bottom pieces, and parallel angles for the legs. To make the parts interlock, I paired one top and bottom piece together, and then marked a notch along the top edge of one set and along the bottom edge of the other set. And then I used a jigsaw to cut the notches. Another way to cut these notches is to use the depth stop on a miter saw. To do this, I rotated the stop plate into position and then turned the bolt and nut until the blade stopped at half the depth of my material. I clamped a spacer block against the fence and then made several cuts before breaking out the remaining pieces, periodically checking the depth until the interlocking pieces fit together to create a flush surface. Next, I prepped the top and bottom pieces with pocket holes at each end. Lastly, I knocked the outside corner off the bottom of each vertical leg to make it a bit easier to round over with a sander later on. I applied glue to the joints and connected the parts of the first frame using pocket hole screws. I continued with the second frame, assembling all but the final board. Since the frames need to interlock, I slid the first frame into the second frame and could then install the final board. After applying glue, I locked the notches of the 2 frames together to finish the base. Once the glue dried, I sanded the frame, rounding over those outside corners, and then started the process of applying a coat of stain, followed by 2 coats of exterior polyurethane. To finish up the tabletop, I flipped the mold on 2 scrap blocks to support the concrete and gently flexed the side of the mold to pop it free from the concrete. Since it had only been about 24 hours, the concrete was still pretty damp, so I wet a sanding sponge and smoothed out the edges and rough patches before letting it cure for another couple days. Once the concrete was fully cured, I glued it to the base with construction adhesive. Finally, I applied and buffed off several coats of a protective wax to create a beautiful matte finish. I hope you enjoyed this project. For more easy woodworking projects and tool tutorials, visit thisoldhouse.com. I'm Jenn Largesse. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. This Old House has got a video for just about every home improvement project, so be sure to check out the others. And if you like what you see, click on the subscribe button to make sure that you get our newest videos right in your feed.